Hey, welcome to my channel. Please tell me in the comments where are you watching this from? This would help me a lot.
The first time I met them, they looked at me the way you look at a stain on a white carpet. I was 26, in love with a man who laughed like summer rain, and stupid enough to believe that love was enough. His name was Daniel Whitmore. His parents were Arthur and Vivian, and they lived in a house that smelled like old money and older grudges. 3 stories of brick and ivy in Greenwich, Connecticut, with a driveway long enough to host a funeral procession. I wore the dress Daniel picked. Navy blue, modest, the kind that says, "I'm not trying too hard." I brought a pie. Homemade. My mother's recipe, the one she made for church socials, the one that won blue ribbons at county fairs. Vivian took the pie and handed it to the housekeeper without looking at it. "How quaint," she said. "Daniel, she's robust." That was the word. Robust. Like I was a wine or a cheese, not a person. Not the woman their son had been dating for 8 months. The woman he wanted to marry. The woman who'd spent 3 hours picking the right shade of lipstick to match a dress she couldn't afford. Arthur didn't speak to me at all. He read the newspaper through dinner. Actual newsprint, crisp and rustling, a performance of disinterest so complete it felt like violence. When Daniel said, "Dad, Claire's a pediatric nurse," Arthur turned one page and said, "How nurturing." Nurturing. Like robust. A word that sounds like a compliment if you don't listen to the teeth in it. I cried in the car on the way home. Daniel held my hand and said, "They'll come around. They're just protective." I believed him. I had to. I was already too far in love to believe anything else. The wedding was small. That was their doing, though they pretended it was mine. Claire's family is modest. Vivian told the wedding planner, loud enough for me to hear from the next room. Best to keep things intimate. We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place. My mother sat in the third row, wearing a dress she'd sewn herself, holding a handkerchief to her mouth like she was trying to hold in words that would burn the chapel down. My father wasn't there. He couldn't be. He was in a prison upstate, serving year 12 of a 15-year sentence for vehicular manslaughter. I didn't tell the Whitmores about my father. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew what they'd do with the information. I'd seen it in their eyes from the first meeting. The hunger for weakness, the way they circled anything vulnerable like sharks scenting blood. So I said my father was dead. A heart attack. Years ago. Simple. Clean. No follow-up questions. Vivian's smile at the wedding was the first genuine thing I'd seen from her. It wasn't happiness for Daniel. It was satisfaction. Like a farmer watching the last seed go into the ground. I should have known then. But I was too busy being a bride. Too busy being loved. The first year was small cruelties. Vivian forgetting to invite me to the Whitmore Women's Luncheon, then sending photos to the family group chat. Arthur calling Daniel's office by accident and asking to speak to his real assistant, then chuckling when I answered. Birthday gifts of expensive clothing 3 sizes too small, with notes that said, "Thought this would suit your frame." I told myself it was class anxiety, old money threatened by new ambition. I told myself patience would wear them down, that if I just loved Daniel hard enough, they'd see what he saw. I was wrong. But I was also right about one thing. Patience did wear something down. Just not them. It wore me down, softened me, made me into clay they could shape. By year 3, I was cooking Sunday dinners Vivian criticized but always finished. By year 4, I was driving Vivian to her doctor's appointments, sitting in waiting rooms for hours while she complained about my driving, my music, my lack of appropriate conversation. By year 5, I was managing Arthur's medication schedule, organizing his files, being the daughter-in-law who never complained, never pushed back, never gave them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Daniel saw it. He saw it and he didn't stop it. He'd squeeze my hand under the table and mouth, "I'm sorry," and then go back to his steak. He loved me, I think, in his way, but he loved peace more. He'd been raised in a house where peace was purchased with other people's pain, and he didn't know how to pay any other way. "They're old," he'd say. "Set in their ways. They'll be gone soon, and then it's just us." He said that at 40. His parents were in their 60s, healthy, vicious, and showing no signs of dying soon enough. I started to hate him a little then, not for failing to defend me, for making me need defending in the first place, for bringing me into that house, that family, that slow, grinding machine of contempt, and then standing to the side while it chewed me up. But I stayed. Because I was stubborn. Because I was raised to finish what I started. Because some part of me, some stupid, broken part, still believed that if I just endured long enough, I'd win. I didn't know what winning looked like. I just knew it wasn't this. The letters were in a box labeled Daniel Childhood. I found them in October, during the annual basement purge Vivian assigned me every fall. "The help doesn't understand organization," she'd say. "You're so good at these things, Claire." The box was behind a water heater, wedged between insulation and a wall that had been painted sometime in the 70s. It wasn't meant to be found. But I'd learned to be thorough in that house. Thoroughness was survival. The letters were from Daniel to his parents, dated 2004, 2005, 2006. His college years. I shouldn't have read them, but I'd spent 5 years being told I was nothing, and I wanted to see if he'd ever defended me, ever fought for me, ever told them to stop. He hadn't. Not once. Not in any letter I found. But I found something else. A letter from Vivian, dated March 2004. Different handwriting. I knew hers from birthday cards and passive-aggressive notes on the refrigerator. Tight, elegant, the handwriting of a woman who'd never been rushed in her life. "The girl is perfect," it read. "Her father is the one from the accident, the one who killed Elizabeth. She's been using her mother's name, but the records are clear. Arthur found her through the prison correspondence program. She's been writing him for years. We can reach her. We can bring her here. And then, my darling, we can do what the courts wouldn't. We can make him suffer every day for the rest of his life, watching his daughter suffer in our house." I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. The paper didn't dissolve. The world didn't stop spinning. Elizabeth. The name meant nothing to me. But the date, 2004, and the word accident. I knew that word. I'd lived with that word my whole life. My father's word. The word that had put him in prison, that had defined my childhood, that had made me change my name and move to a different state and build a life from the ashes of his mistake. I sat on the basement floor, surrounded by boxes of Daniel's childhood, and I remembered. I was 6 years old when it happened. I didn't understand the trial, the lawyers, the way my mother's face collapsed like a building being demolished. I understood only that my father went away and didn't come back. That people whispered when I walked by. That my mother's hands shook when she wrote checks. I understood years later that he'd been drunk, that he'd run a red light, that he'd killed a college student, a girl, 20 years old, with dark hair and a scholarship, and a family that would never stop mourning. I understood that her name was Elizabeth Whitmore, and I understood, sitting in that basement with dust in my lungs and Vivian's handwriting burning my eyes, that I had been chosen, not loved, not wanted, selected, like a weapon, like a tool, like the final cruel twist in a revenge plot that had started 20 years before I was born. They hadn't hated me because I was poor, or uncultured, or robust. They'd hated me because they were supposed to. Because that was the plan. Because every cruel word, every excluded luncheon, every backhanded compliment was part of a design to make me suffer so my father would suffer, watching from his prison cell, reading my letters that grew increasingly careful, increasingly vague, increasingly sad. Daniel had known. He'd known from the beginning. I found his reply to Vivian's letter, dated April 2004. "Mother, are you certain this is wise? The girl seems kind, innocent even. I don't know if I can. Vivian's response, scrawled in the margin. You will do this for your sister. You will do this for this family. Or you will find yourself without one. And Daniel's final letter, dated June 2004, 2 months before he accidentally bumped into me at a coffee shop in New Haven, 2 months before he asked about my book, my life, my dreams. I understand. I'll do what needs to be done. I sat there for an hour, maybe two. The house was quiet above me, Vivian napping, Arthur at his club, Daniel at work. The water heater hummed. A mouse scratched somewhere in the walls. I didn't cry. That was the strange thing. I felt like I should cry. I felt like the discovery deserved tears, screaming, broken glass. But I just sat there, cold and quiet, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Clarity. They'd made me into a victim. They'd designed me for suffering. They'd turned my love, my patience, my stubborn endurance into weapons against my own family. But they'd also taught me something. 5 years of smiling while I bled. 5 years of cooking dinners for people who hated me. 5 years of being the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect nurse, the perfect target. They'd taught me how to survive in a house that wanted me dead, and now I knew why. That knowledge was a weapon, and I was done being the one it was pointed at. I didn't confront them. That would have been satisfying, but satisfaction wasn't the goal. The goal was winning. Real winning. The kind that leaves your enemy with nothing, not even the dignity of knowing how they lost. I put the letters back in the box. I put the box back behind the water heater. I went upstairs and made Vivian's afternoon tea, chamomile with honey, exactly how she liked it. And I smiled when she complained that the cup was too hot, that the honey was too sweet, that I was useful in a limited way. Thank you, Vivian, I said. I'm so glad I can help. She didn't see it. None of them saw it. The smile was the same. The voice was the same. The patient, enduring, robust daughter-in-law, serving her purpose. But inside, I was gone. The woman who'd loved Daniel, who'd wanted their approval, who'd believed in patience and kindness and the power of love to transform hate. She was dead. I'd buried her in the basement, next to the water heater, next to the truth. What was left was something harder. Something they'd created without knowing it. A woman who knew their secrets, their patterns, their weaknesses. A woman who'd spent 5 years in their house, learning their rhythms, memorizing their lies, cataloging their crimes. Because they had crimes. Everyone has crimes if you look long enough. And I'd been looking for 5 years, not knowing why, driven by some instinct deeper than conscious thought. I'd seen things, remembered things, filed them away without understanding their value. Now I understood. Arthur's investment properties that never appeared on tax returns. Vivian's medical expenses that were always round numbers, always paid in cash, always to a doctor I'd never been able to find. Daniel's business trips that coincided with property auctions in counties where Arthur owned land. They were criminals. Small criminals, careful criminals, the kind who'd gotten away with it for decades because they were rich and white, and nobody asked questions about people who donated to the right charities. I started asking questions, quietly, patiently, the same way I'd done everything in that house. I volunteered to organize Arthur's office. He let me, grateful to be rid of the task, condescending in his gratitude. So good with paperwork, Claire. Such a practical girl. I found the shell companies, the fake leases, the properties purchased under names that traced back to dead relatives, to empty trusts, to addresses that were actually post office boxes in Delaware. I found Vivian's medical records. Not the ones she showed her doctors, the real ones, hidden in a locked drawer I opened with a paperclip, because she'd never thought I was smart enough to be dangerous. The records showed no cancer, no surgeries, no expensive treatments, just a healthy woman who'd been claiming disability insurance for 12 years, collecting payments for a disease she'd never had. I photographed everything. backed it up to 3 cloud accounts, kept physical copies in a safe deposit box under my mother's maiden name. And I waited. Not for the right moment. For the perfect moment. The moment when they'd be surrounded by everyone they cared about impressing, everyone whose opinion mattered to them, everyone who'd never seen the rot beneath the Whitmore polish. Their 50th wedding anniversary was in June. They'd been planning it for a year. A gala, they called it. 200 guests, a string quartet, a caterer who'd worked for the governor. The social event of the season, Vivian said, with the satisfaction of a woman who'd never doubted her place at the center of the world. I offered to handle the details. All of them. "You're so capable, Claire," Vivian said. "It's a wonder you didn't amount to more." I smiled. "I amount to exactly what I need to be, Vivian. For now." The guest list was a map of their empire. Judges, state senators, real estate developers, the editor of the local newspaper who'd never met a Whitmore donation he didn't praise. I added 2 names. Just 2. Detective Marcus Reed, Financial Crimes Division. I'd met him at a charity event years ago, before I understood what charity meant to people like the Whitmores. He'd been investigating Arthur for 18 months, building a case that kept hitting walls of lawyers and missing documents. I sent him an anonymous tip first, then a meeting request. Then, when he was skeptical, when he'd seen too many dead ends, I sent him a photograph of Arthur's ledger. He came to the anniversary, in a tuxedo, with his wife, looking like any other guest. But his eyes found mine across the room, and I saw the hunger in them. The hunger of a man who'd been chasing a ghost and finally found flesh. The second name was harder. Elena Voss, investigative journalist. She'd written about the Whitmores before, a piece about their philanthropy that Arthur had killed with a phone call to the publisher. She'd been looking for a way back in ever since. I sent her the letters. Not copies. The originals. With Vivian's handwriting. With Daniel's cowardice. With the whole ugly plan laid bare. She came too. Not as a guest. As my +1. My college friend. Recently divorced. In need of distraction. Vivian hated her on sight. Too sharp. Too watchful. Too unimpressed by the string quartet. "Really, Claire," Vivian whispered, while greeting guests. "Must you invite every stray?" "Elena's writing a book," I said, "about family dynasties. I thought she might find yours instructive." Vivian's smile flickered, just for a moment. Then she turned to a state senator and the moment passed. But I saw it. The first crack. The first hint that she knew, somewhere deep and animal, that something was wrong. I smiled and poured champagne. Dinner was at 8. The speeches started at 9. Arthur stood first, bloated and triumphant, his tuxedo straining at the seams, his face red with wine and self-satisfaction. He talked about love, about partnership, about building something that lasts. The guests murmured appreciation. Vivian watched him with the devotion of a woman who'd built her life around his approval. Then Daniel stood. My husband. The man who'd chosen his family's revenge over my heart, who'd played a role for 5 years, who'd whispered, "I'm sorry," while his mother carved me apart. He looked at me. I looked back. I didn't smile. I didn't need to anymore. "I want to say something about my wife," Daniel said. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. I'd seen those hands shake before. When he was nervous, when he was lying, when he was caught between what he wanted and what his parents demanded. "Claire has been..." He stopped, swallowed. "Claire has been more than I deserved. More than I knew how to value. And I need to say, tonight, in front of everyone who matters to me, I'm sorry. For everything I didn't say. For everything I didn't do. For the ways I failed her, again and again, because I was too afraid to be the man she needed." The room was quiet. Arthur's face was purple. Vivian's hand was frozen on her wineglass. "My parents taught me that family is everything," Daniel continued. "But they were wrong. Family isn't blood. Family isn't obligation. Family is the person who stays when everyone else tells them to leave." Claire stayed. She stayed when she had every reason to go. And I. His voice broke. He looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years I saw him. Really saw him. Not the boy who'd followed his mother's orders. Not the man who'd chosen peace over justice. Just Daniel. Broken and sorry and finally honest. I love you, he said. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I love you. And I'm done being their weapon. He sat down. The silence was absolute. Then someone coughed. Then Arthur stood, his chair scraping loud enough to wake the dead. My son is drunk, Arthur announced. Pay no attention to— I'm not drunk, Dad, Daniel said. I'm sober. For the first time in years. And I'm done. I stood up. The room turned to me. 200 faces, curious, confused, waiting for the next act in a drama they didn't understand. Arthur, I said. My voice carried. I'd learned that too in 5 years of being talked over. How to project, how to command, how to make people listen. Vivian, Daniel, guests. I have something to share. A family story, if you will, about how the Whitmores built their empire. I pressed the remote in my pocket. The screen behind the head table, installed for a slideshow of 50 years of love, flickered to life. The first image was Vivian's letter. March 2004. The plan, the selection, the weaponization of my love. The second was Arthur's ledger, the shell companies, the fake properties, the tax fraud that had funded this party, this house, this life of performative generosity. The third was Vivian's real medical records, the healthy woman who'd collected disability for a disease she'd invented, year after year, while criticizing me for being practical. The fourth was Daniel's letter, his complicity, his choice. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at the room, at the faces shifting from confusion to shock to dawning horror. At Detective Reed, standing now, moving toward Arthur with the slow inevitability of justice delayed. At Elena Voss, recording everything, her phone steady, her eyes bright with the story of her career. My father made a mistake, I said. He was drunk. He ran a red light. He killed a girl named Elizabeth Whitmore. He paid for that mistake with 15 years of his life, and I have paid for it every day since. Not because I was guilty, but because these people decided that my suffering would be his punishment. I walked around the table, stood in front of Vivian, who was frozen, pale, her perfect face cracking like porcelain. You chose me, I said. You found me. You brought me here. You made me into your revenge, and for 5 years I let you. I smiled. I cooked. I endured. I became exactly what you needed me to be. I leaned down, close enough to smell her perfume, the same she'd worn at my wedding, at every holiday, at every moment of my manufactured suffering. But you made a mistake, Vivian, I whispered. You taught me how to survive in your house. You taught me how to hide my anger, how to smile while I bled, how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. And now, I straightened up, looked at the room, at the cameras, at the future unfolding in real time. I'm using everything you taught me, against you. Detective Reed reached Arthur. The old man didn't resist. He just sat down, heavily, his tuxedo finally surrendering to gravity. 2 officers appeared from the service entrance, Reed's backup, waiting for the signal I'd given him with a nod. Vivian screamed. It was an ugly sound, nothing like the refined murmur she'd cultivated for 50 years. You trash! You nobody! We made you! We gave you everything! You gave me pain, I said, and I turned it into patience. You gave me hate, and I turned it into evidence. You gave me a prison, and I learned how to pick every lock. I turned to Daniel. He was standing, his face wet, his hands still shaking. But he was standing. That was something. I don't forgive you, I said. I don't know if I ever will. But you stood up. Finally. That counts for something. What do you want me to do? He asked. His voice was raw, stripped of every performance he'd ever learned. I want you to help me clean up the mess you helped make, I said. There's a foundation for victims of drunk driving. It's going to be called the Elizabeth Whitmore Foundation. You're going to run it, not as penance, as work. Real work, for real people, instead of the fake charity your parents used to launder their reputation. He nodded. No hesitation, no negotiation, just yes. And if I fail? He asked. Then you fail, I said. But you'll fail trying to be better. That's more than you were doing before. I walked away from the head table, through the crowd, past the cameras, out into the garden where the string quartet had abandoned their instruments and the night air smelled like jasmine and endings. Elena caught me at the door. The story. Can I use your name? Use all of it, I said. Claire Brennan, daughter of Thomas Brennan, inmate number 44871. The girl they chose, the woman they made, and the one who walked away anyway. She nodded, already writing, already gone into the story. I stood in the garden and I breathed. For the first time in 5 years, I breathed air that wasn't poisoned by performance. I was nobody's daughter-in-law, nobody's revenge, nobody's victim. I was just Claire, standing in the dark, alive. The trials took 2 years. Arthur was convicted of tax fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Vivian's disability fraud added another charge, and her attempt to bribe a juror. Classic Vivian, unable to believe that money couldn't fix everything, added witness tampering. They'd die in prison, the doctors said. Arthur of a heart condition, Vivian of something slower, something that would give her time to understand that her empire was ash. Daniel ran the foundation. Not well, at first. He was clumsy, earnest, constantly apologizing for things he couldn't fix. But he showed up. Every day. He sat with families who'd lost people to drunk driving. He listened to their anger, their grief, their need for someone to blame. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He just listened. I visited him once, 6 months in. Not as a wife. As the foundation's legal advisor, a role I'd taken because someone needed to make sure the money went where it was supposed to, not into someone's pocket. How are you? I asked. Alive, he said. For the first time in years. It's not good exactly, but it's real. He looked at me. The old hunger was there, the old love, but tempered now. Changed. He knew what he'd lost. He knew he might never get it back. And he was learning to live with that knowledge, which was more than he'd ever done before. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. Why the foundation? Why Elizabeth's name? You could have destroyed us completely. You could have taken everything. Why give any of it back? I thought about my father. Sitting in his cell, reading my letters that grew increasingly careful, increasingly vague. He'd known something was wrong. He'd written me, near the end of his sentence, asking if I was safe. I'd lied, told him I was happy, told him I was loved. I'd been protecting him from the truth. And in doing so, I'd been protecting the Whitmores, letting them use my silence as a weapon against both of us. Elizabeth didn't choose this, I said. She didn't choose to die. She didn't choose to have her name turned into a weapon. She was just a girl, crossing a street, living her life. And your parents, you turned her into a symbol, a reason to hate, a justification for cruelty. I stood up, straightened my jacket, looked at the man who'd been my husband, my betrayer, my unexpected ally. The foundation isn't for you, I said. It's not even for me, it's for her, for Elizabeth. For every person who dies because someone else made a mistake, and for every family that has to figure out how to live after. It's for taking her name back from your parents and giving it to something real, something that helps, instead of hurts. He nodded, tears on his face, but he wasn't performing, just feeling. Finally. Will you ever forgive me? he asked. I don't know, I said. But I'm here. That's more than you had a right to expect. Don't waste it asking for things I can't give you yet. I left him there, in the office we'd built from the ruins of his parents' empire, surrounded by files and photos and the hard daily work of making something good from something broken. I didn't love him anymore. I knew that. The love had died in the basement next to the water heater, next to the truth. But I didn't hate him either. Hate required energy I no longer had to give. He was just Daniel. A man who'd made terrible choices and was trying, imperfectly, to make better ones. That was enough. For now. Maybe forever. My father died 3 years after the trial. Heart failure, sudden and complete, the day before his release. He'd served every day of his sentence, earned every hour of good behavior, and died with his freedom one sunrise away. I buried him in the cemetery where Elizabeth Whitmore was buried. Not because I thought they'd want to be near each other, because I wanted to visit them both. Because I wanted to stand between their graves and say, I tried. I tried to make something right from everything that went wrong. The foundation grew. We helped families navigate the court system, find counseling, rebuild after loss. We lobbied for stricter DUI penalties and better treatment programs. We became something the Whitmores never were, a real force for good, built on honesty instead of performance. Daniel stayed. He never remarried. He worked 12-hour days, took no salary, lived in a small apartment above the foundation offices. He told me once, at a board meeting, that he'd found his purpose. I didn't tell him that purpose wasn't enough, that he needed joy too, that he needed to learn to be happy without earning it through suffering. Maybe he learned that eventually. Maybe he didn't. It wasn't my job to save him. It had never been my job to save him. I moved to a different city, started a different life, kept my name, Claire Brennan, the name I'd hidden, the name I'd reclaimed. I worked as a nurse again, in a different hospital, with patients who didn't know my history, my revenge, my carefully constructed victory. Some nights I dreamed of the basement, the water heater, the box, the letters that changed everything. Some nights I dreamed of Vivian's face when the screen lit up, the crack in her perfection, the dawning horror that her weapon had learned to use itself. And some nights I dreamed of nothing at all, just sleep, deep and dark and peaceful. The sleep of someone who'd finished what they started and was finally free. The Whitmore house was sold at auction, bought by a tech entrepreneur who renovated it beyond recognition. I drove past once, years later, and didn't recognize the driveway, the garden, the facade. It was just a house. Pretty, expensive, empty of meaning. I didn't stop, didn't linger, just kept driving, toward whatever came next, because that's what survivors do. We keep driving, we keep building, we keep turning the things that were meant to destroy us into the foundations of something new. Vivian taught me that. Not intentionally, not kindly, but effectively. She made me into someone who could endure anything, survive anything, and then, when the moment came, strike back with precision and patience. She thought she was creating a victim. She created a weapon. And weapons, once forged, don't disappear. They just wait for the next battle, the next injustice, the next family that thinks they can choose someone's fate and never face consequences. I'm still waiting, still watching, still smiling. And if you see me at a party, pouring wine, making pleasant conversation, being the perfect guest, you might want to ask yourself, what box did I find in your basement? What truth am I waiting to tell? And when the lights go down and the screen flickers to life, will you recognize the story? Or will you just be surprised, like they were, that the person you made into a victim was actually the one writing the ending all along?